Welcome back to the Literacy Lunch Break. We are so excited to be talking with Dr. Nell Thompson today. Thank you so much for joining us when I know you are extremely busy.
I'm very excited to be with you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I know you have served in a variety of roles: educational consultant, researcher, author, chair of Big Sky Literacy Summit. And you've also worked in a variety of locations, from North Dakota to Bush, Alaska. And so I would love for our listeners just to get and hear from you a little bit of background about your experiences. And again, the role of literacy and equity and diversity, since you've had such a wide range of experiences. I think that would be helpful for our listeners to hear a little background before we jump into some of the questions.
Oh, it's such a great question. What first comes to my mind is my wanderlust as a young, adventurous professional. I was a speech language pathologist early in my career, and I had been in the Peace Corps, and I really wanted to continue serving children who may not be served in ways that I had learned through my work in impoverished communities and marginalized communities in the Dominican Republic, actually. And so that led me to Bush, Alaska. And I really, all of this has taught me so much about who I am today. And of course, hindsight's 2020, right? So you're like, oh, wow, I'm so much smarter now. Wisdom comes through reflection, though. Wisdom comes through taking the time to consider what it is about our past that helps redefine our future. And I think in the world of literacy that we're in right now, we have so much opportunity to look at the past to redefine how this future is going to roll out with how the science of reading impacts the future of literacy and equity in education. So for me, I was trained in evidence-based practice. I'm a speech language pathologist. That has been our journey as SLPs. That's just part of the protocol. And so there was nothing in my life that was deviant from what is current practice in the science of reading. It's very consistent. It's very parallel. It's, of course, as a speech language pathologist, I did very much intensive in intervention. But what I have learned most, I think the greatest gift I have learned from that journey, from my roots in North Dakota on a ranch to my work in Mississippi to South Carolina to Atlanta to Alaska, is that it's giving me these varied experiences that are filled with cultural variation. They're filled with linguistic variation. They're filled with children who don't look like me and they don't talk like me, and they come from families that are nothing like mine. That is the greatest gift I have. And it's really taught me now to think about how their lives occur in an ecosystem and how that system is interconnected with public policy, it's interconnected with public education, it's interconnected with everything around them, how food is delivered to the community, how public health exists in the community, how early intervention exists in the community. Because when you're in rural places and you fly in on an airplane, there's not a lot of access to urgent care.
Right, exactly, yes.
So if something goes wrong, and maybe if you're developing differently than your brother or your sister, that one person who flew in, who is what my job was that connection to answering what's different. And it allowed me to consider that we're all connected and that I have a part to play in this, and that I can help support and elevate the dialogue around bringing to children what they need, and in a way that is supportive, and it's maybe now what we might call equitable, but it's really about understanding everything with which they are existing within. And Peter Senge in the Fifth Discipline talks about this as systems thinking, and really knowing that this child exists within a family. They have their own communication. They have their ways of loving each other. They have their ways of being. And then we ask a child to come into the school ecosystem, and all of a sudden we're asked to like assimilate into everything that that school is doing versus what was the child doing? How can we support a child in their neurodiversity and in their extreme diversity of life in really helping them develop in a parallel way where we value everything that is within their system and we continue building on to that. I think those are some of my greatest lessons. And I write it out as it's very similar to an Anita Archer thought. It comes from systems thinking. What our adult actions lead to learner outcomes. It's a cause and effect. And that causal thing then leads to another action that says if this is the outcome and it isn't supportive and uplifting for that student, then we have a conversation that drives another action to change that outcome again. It's an iterative process. And so equity comes through that innovative, continuous process of solving the problem in front of us and not seeing it as a problem, but always an opportunity for a solution. I think that's my greatest teaching from my past, is that there was nothing normal about what I did in most of my experiences. And so I was always faced with, this wasn't in a textbook and this wasn't in a textbook. So I really had to think about what is best for this child. And we all exist on a neurodiversity continuum. None of us is like another person.
Right.
And therefore, what could education look like, feel like, sound like, and be like? And what are the systems that will best support a child? And sometimes I flew into my villages with the dentist or the nurse, and I realized how interconnected we were and how supportive we had to be of each other to fully support a family and a child. This is complex work. Building children is complex, and no system will be the same. So I think the greatest wisdom coming out of that, and I look now into my future, is really systems intelligence, which also comes from Senge's work, and really knowing that this takes a cognitive, emotional, a lot of inputs from us as adults to really work through, reach higher levels of innovation and sometimes disruption in systems for the betterment of the children we're serving.
Yeah. And I love that you just said sometimes disruption, right? Because I heard you talk about this expectation to assimilate and in just, in education, I think that is one of the biggest challenges. I say it all the time, is we're working with humans, right? And so you talked about SLP and the science behind that, but then you're also talking about very human and very different interactions dependent on children's experiences and where they live and how, and what their culture is. And so there is this balance between, yes, here's some science around the way we learn to read or the way we learn, but that to speak and our sounds, but that's not enough to truly, as you said, get to that goal of what is our goal, right? Yeah. And how, and I think that's tricky, right? As educators, we go into this field because we care and we want to educate and we want to support young learners. And then, I always share when I first started teaching, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not prepared for the variety of needs or the variety of or the lack of knowledge that I have. Around different cultures or different needs or differences that I want to honor, but then also support in growing, as you said, parallel, right? Like we can, so I attended Big Sky last year for my very first time. And it was just, for me, really just a moment in my life as an educator where I'm like, this is something that we need to be talking about so much more about the disruption, but also a huge impact in discussion last year about leadership. And so that was one of the questions that I definitely wanted to hit on today, because I think it is so important and critical to have leaders that understand the variety of needs and honor that and build teachers' capacity to do that. Because again, we're never taught this in undergrad or even most of the time graduate school, right? A lot of what you learned is through your experiences. So I would love for you to just share some thoughts about, leadership and support to really meet these goals of allowing education to truly be disrupted and really talk about all components of human interaction and education?
Well, the first big cornerstone of all of this is great leaders are growers. You are just growing every day. So I actually want to share something about leading this work into the 2025 summit, which is happening next week. Just yesterday, I'm a grower. I'm choosing to lead large in my own life. And this work that I've done for almost 30 years now, I had a huge aha yesterday. My colleague and friend, Francine, is doing a main stage talk on the laws of assimilation. She's Cheyenne. She's from Eastern Montana. She spoke Cheyenne the first 5 years of her life. And one of the things she taught me is about assimilation laws said that she couldn't speak Cheyenne anymore. Okay. And then fast forward, I'm talking to researchers, and it's just such a leader move out there. So this is a big nugget for you to think about. How interesting it was that when Francine went to school, the expectation was that she looked like, she sounded like, and she acted like her teachers. There was never an expectation that her teachers would learn Cheyenne.
Right.
Or learn to what we've learned through Julie Washington's work and many great researchers in South Africa, what we call translanguaging. So that if something was misunderstood in a classroom, you could use Cheyenne to translanguage it into English. And so when you and I have been teachers in classrooms, right? What an amazing thought process it would be. Like if I'm in a country like South Africa, where I think there are 11 or 13 national languages, where an educator has many languages in their toolbox, and we walk into a classroom and we're able to help our students bridge from first language into academic language, and we can translanguage, and we build a culture around really inclusivity around all language and all diversity. And then we all are at this on the same path towards academic success within an academic text that is different in register than what our home language is and our friend language is and all of the other languages that we use. Profound, right? So that was like a huge leader awakening for myself. I will lead differently in schools now. I will think differently about how I lead the students in front of me, the teachers in front of me. And then that only happens inside of really open and innovative cultures. I think one of the greatest leader moves that you can make out there, if you're a first grade teacher to a superintendent, really work towards building culture where risk taking is expected.
Oh, I love
that. Failure will always lead to innovation that is more supportive of the children you serve. I grew up in a culture where failure was a big no-no. So I became a perfectionist.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of teachers have that. And you don't want to get it wrong. Why? Because first graders only have one first grade year. You hear these mantras, right?
Yeah.
What I want to say is have more compassion when you're leading, because not all of us learned everything we needed to know in school. It's not possible.
Right.
Life is too big and too complex. So we have to choose to be in what we call collaborative, teaming situations. I would say leadership collaborative teaming, where we all choose to personally lead ourselves, not just the superintendent, the principal. Right. This is not about positional leadership. This is about truly knowing that I get to have an impact in the lives of the children I serve. And it starts with me. If I don't grow first and I don't get curious about why things aren't working, then I'm going to guarantee you're not going to have the outcomes you desire to have. You have to get curious about why things aren't working, and then take a risk and ask the questions. And in good teaming and collaboration, guess what happens? It's something called emergence. I love the word emergence. And we in education call it collective effect, right? We all know collective effect. And Hattie talks about collective effect. It's like 1.58, amazing D score. Like that's an effect size that's like off the charts, the largest effect size that there is. Now, George Batch taught me something. He's out of University of South Florida, looks at MTSS and looks at when a leader is in a collaborative teaming process, that number goes to 1.78.
Wow.
That means that inside that collaborative moment, something happens. It's an emergence effect that we all come together to support a new solution. And there, it's not about my idea wins. It's about
Mhm.
our ideas will evolve and become something we never even thought of, most likely. And I think all of us have been in those situations. We're like, why didn't we think of that before? It's
Yeah.
because we weren't together
Mhm.
allowing ourselves these innovative, inspired thoughts that cause for what we call emergence of something new. That's where disruption comes from.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I believe that great leaders open the space for that. And that's where equity can come. I mean, there's no opportunity other. It has to be equitable because you are never going to move away from um, solutions that serve children. You're going to move towards them.
Right.
And in that, you provide the best possible support the students need.
I love as I was listening to you too talk about getting curious, right? Rather than because and when you mention MTSS, in reality, oftentimes MTSS is, I've served as a classroom teacher, a reading specialist, an assistant principal, a literacy coach. And, oftentimes we'd come to that MTSS table and it would be more of a problem, right? Like,
Mhm.
oh, these kids aren't here and this is what the data versus really being, I think that even that small shift of being curious, right? If something's not working, let's dig into why it's not working.
Mhm.
Um, but also something that just stood out. I mean, so much stood out to me, but also I love that you spoke about being a leader for yourself, right? We don't always have to wait for the superintendent, assistant superintendent, building administrator, that we as teachers that are putting in the we're touching kids, whatever our role may be, we can take on that initiative to be the leader and really to be curious and to focus on that goal. Because like you said, if that's the way we're doing it, then how are we not serving them, right? If we're getting curious and we're digging in and we're being willing to take a risk. And I love that
Mhm.
idea of culture, of shifting the culture.
Mhm.
I'm curious though, because I love these discussions. The series for me has been one of my favorite because we have just been able to talk to a variety of thought leaders and educators that have really created such a large impact. But I also know sometimes that really is like a little bubble when we look at education and, and when we look at our nation. And like, how do we really start to make this a larger conversation or a larger shift, or really start to encourage those conversations to be more meaningful and to be different than the typical conversation of,
Mhm.
skill based MT data, red,
Mhm.
green, or how do
Mhm.
we do that? How do we make those steps to really make that impact to where it's not just kind of the small bubble of people that are talking about it, but we're really ensuring that this is something that is part of education? Big question.
It's a good question, but I think you'll feel probably similar sentiments to me that if we as humans do get curious, it's always going to come back to the common denominator of knowledge.
Yeah.
And so having that knowledge, for example, I was talking to my friend Tiffany Hogan this morning, and one of the things that language is needing to have is to it's day in the sunshine. It actually, the reading brain is built on the language brain,
Yes.
right? And
Right.
there's this assumption that the language brain just takes care of itself. Well, it turns out that most children need direct, explicit, systematic language instruction, but our curricular resources aren't built around
Real
language
big.
development.
Mhm.
Even though language has a developmental precedence over reading, it drives what happens in reading. So the summit this year obviously is in the business of shifting an entire paradigm
Yeah.
around the language brain. How do we shift this in the nation? Knowledge. The more knowledge we have about the simple view of reading when it is discussed as the four types of readers that are defined by the simple view of reading by Goff and Tumner, is that those are continuums. Word reading is on a continuum. You can have very poor word reading, you can have very good word reading. But one of the things that is misunderstood is that word reading is language and
Right.
that words are language, and that the act of mechanically processing how print turns into sound, what is it doing? It's turning back into language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what if I have an underlying neurodiverse variant of language difference that it will never go away? It's persistent, it's consistent, it will never leave you. Knowledge now has to shift to the fact that that language continuum is more impactful on a child's life than if word reading is in place. We
Yeah,
haven't talked about that enough. And I
absolutely.
will probably go to my grave talking about this. Language has more impact on your life and your outcomes, your happiness, your marriage, how much you make, everything. Why? But we define it as reading.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting, reading is language.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have better language skills to begin with, you will have better reading skills. And so how do we begin this big change? We build knowledge, and all of our, from our teacher preparation to our in-service. My mentor Louisa Moats did language essentials for teachers or reading and spelling. And the interesting thing in training thousands of educators in letters, it's all about language.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, when I trained in Mississippi and I trained in New Mexico and Arizona, all over the United States, I can tell you, I'm a way different human today now that I deeply understand that there is a truth that is unavoidable now, that comprehension and production, otherwise known as what we receive and what we express, expressive receptive language, comprehension and production travel together forever. So if you're not able to comprehend, you're not able to produce in writing or in speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Travel together forever. And we haven't even been screening
Yeah.
it. We
Nope.
haven't built curriculums around it.
You're absolutely right. Mm.
It is a profound reality that reading occurs and develops by 8 years of age. It's a mechanical thing that happens. Yes, some children are going to need short
Right.
vowels and CVC structure, but guess what? Some children do not have syntactical ordering. And that's going to affect how they write, affect how they speak, affect how they think, affect how they receive for the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And that development of language, this is the most profound thing in what we can do for the future and how much we can learn and take away, is imagine a dot on a continuum, like a horizon. That's the dot of a baby being born. And in the first years, it goes exponentially up because growth is exponential in those first 5 years of a child's life. Then when they come to school and they learn to listen through story and communication, and then they learn to read, the line goes even more exponential. The amount of academic knowledge that comes into a child's life through reading and listening is profound. If you're a student with dyslexia, you don't read as much, but you receive. Your line starts to flatten out. Now, because I graduated at 18, does it mean my line continues to grow? Or does it mean I start to flatline? Depends on if I choose to learn.
Right. Yeah.
Growth will happen across your lifespan in language. It will continue to go up your entire life. Unlike reading, you learn to read words, it's done. It doesn't keep growing.
Exactly. Like the constrained and unconstrained skills,
That's right.
Exactly.
Exactly what it is. And so knowledge.
I love that answer. And I know our listeners, when they're listening to this, Big Sky will have already happened. But while we're recording it, it's next week and I am attending and I am so excited. I cannot wait to hear. And so, hopefully I would love for you to come back and especially talking about the oral language. This is something we've been talking quite a bit about here is we mentioned oral language briefly, right? Oral language is the foundation of it all. And then we move on to all of these discrete skills to teach reading and writing. And we don't ever, like you said, we're not assessing it. We're not explicitly teaching it. And so I'm just grateful that you brought that into the conversation. Knowledge, yes. And then, yes, oral language has to be such a larger part of the conversation when we talk about.
Well, and to be clear, I don't know about you, but most educators did not take language development courses, language instruction courses,
Mhm.
language intervention courses. So
Nope.
we have a lot of work to
A
do.
lot of
Our knowledge and practice standards don't include these.
Mhm.
Our rubrics for screening curricular resources don't actually just look at language development. And so there's a lot of work we have to do in this area, which you'll learn about at Big Sky, but we know that we have to. We have to. And for all educators out there are resources that we can screen language and we can teach language, and they're evidence-based at random control level that is profound. So we have a few on the market, but they're not in the hands of educators.
Mhm.
And so I will be a crusader for ensuring that all educators and leaders know that this is supplemental. It's in addition to, and one day, I hope all publishers look at all these language curriculums and say, oh, the principles of language development and language impact must be included in all published curricular resource. Or we come to a day where we fully acknowledge that reading needs different curriculum for different
Mhm.
aspects of
Yes.
reading.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And so we're pushing new paradigms. And I just have to say, everybody can learn from Big Sky. We make all the mentor recordings is 25 plus hours available to everybody. So please know the ripple effects are meant for everybody.
Mhm. I love that. And truly I came back last year and I think the way I kind of described it to everyone was it's the conversation that is just a little bit ahead of the game, right? Like you
Yeah.
kind of see we're talking about things we should be talking about, but isn't typically talked about. And just even as you shared about oral language, right? We know the importance, but it's not a big conversation. And so as I said, I'm really looking forward to it. And I thank you so much for your time today. I'm so grateful our listeners got to learn from you. And thank you for all of your contributions and for all that you do.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we explore literacy topics in a snack-sized, easily digestible format.